Hey guys, my name is Arnav Gupta and I'm going to be talking about cystic fibrosis in the lungs. Has anyone ever heard about cystic fibrosis or know anyone with the disease? Okay, so you guys do have a general idea what the disease is. For those of you with less of a clue, have you ever been sick and had to cough and felt a lot of thick mucus in your throat and lungs? Well, that's what it's like to be living with cystic fibrosis, but 100% of the time. What's more sad is that the disease is genetic and it is passed on from parents to children, and children are the one more severely affected because their lungs are still maturing. Cystic fibrosis is a debilitating disease in which patients who suffer from it have difficulty breathing, chronic lung issues, and they constantly have flagellum in their lungs that they have to try to cough out. What's unique about this disease is that people with it have very, very salty skin. And for this reason, an early diagnostic tool used by doctors before genetic technologies advanced was to lick babies and see if their sweat was salty. Think about it. Isn't that interesting? Think about your doctor licking your baby to see if you have cystic fibrosis. Well, we'll get into the reason why doctors are licking babies later. So what exactly is wrong in people with cystic fibrosis and what's causing them to face so many lung issues? On the left here, we have a bunch of different cells. They look like hexagons with smaller circles inside. The smaller circles are the nucleus, and that holds the DNA, which is the blueprint for the cell. All of these different cells make up tissues, and all your cells eventually make up tissues, and all your tissues eventually make up organs. Your organs eventually come together and make organ systems, and these organ systems, like the respiratory system, the circulatory system, the digestive system, they come all together and make who we are. So, if you look at these cells, each of them have to be able to send signals to each other and receive signals to carry out its function. If a cell doesn't have the ability to send and receive signals, then it won't be able to do what it has to do. So on the left here, you can see that these cells are surrounded by a barrier. This barrier is called the plasma membrane, and it is used to separate the cells from the inside, the cytosol, or the outside, which is the extracellular space. So anything inside of these cells is a cytosol, and anything to the outside is either another cell or the extracellular space. So we have a barrier, and we're creating some way to prevent the inside of the cell from going bad or creating a barrier from the outside of the environment. But now that we have a barrier, we need something to allow signals to come in from the different cells. On the plasma membrane, we see receptors. These are basically gates that allow different signals, different molecules to either leave the cell or enter the cell. On the right side, we have the cystic fibrosis transferon receptor. And this receptor is basically a chloride ion channel, all right? And it's located in the plasma membrane. Here on the bottom, you have the cytoplasm, which everything inside or on the bottom is inside the cell. On the top, we have the extracellular space, which is outside the cell. And here in the plasma membrane is the chloride receptor. So this receptor, basically, all it does is allow chloride ions to enter the cell and exit the cell. However, people with cystic fibrosis have a faulty chloride ion channel and basically aren't able to allow chloride ion channels to leave the cell. So I said patients with cystic fibrosis have very salty skin, trouble breathing, and a very mucousy cough. But how is that the result of not being able to transport chloride ions? Well, here it is. This diagram is showing you the bronchioles of your lungs. This area over here is the interior of the cell. Everything above it is the extracellular space, and everything below it is also the extracellular space. So what these cells are doing is they're trying to maintain an aqueous environment outside the cell. What they do is they send chloride ions outside the cell, and what this does is, because you're sending chloride ions outside the cell, there's going to be they're doing this to combat the positive sodium ions outside the cell. By sending chloride ions outside the cell and sodium ions outside the cell, you're maintaining a very aqueous environment. So on the left here, we have a normal condition. We have chloride ions going outside the cell, sodium ions are staying outside the cell, and we have this mucus layer above. This mucus layer is what lines our lungs, and sometimes when this thing gets too thick, that's when you have that mucousy cough. But by maintaining chloride ions and sodium ions outside the cell, we're able to maintain that aqueous environment, and now this mucus layer will not build up. However, people with cystic fibrosis, the problem is their chloride ion on the right here is not working. Because of this, chloride ions are going to start to build up in the cell. Chloride ions are negatively charged. Now the cell is going to build up with all these chloride ions and are going to become very, very negatively charged. So what's the cell going to do to combat that? They're going to bring positively charged sodium ions into the cell. So you have a buildup of negative, you bring positive in, that's going to negate everything. Okay? So all of these negative chloride ions and positive sodium ions are brought into the cell. But now we can't maintain that aqueous environment outside the cell. What do you think is going to happen? Exactly. This mucousy layer is going to start to build up, and it's going to start to block the airways, and it's going to create a lot of trouble breathing. You're going to have trouble breathing, a constant flagellum in your cough, and you're always going to be trying to cough it out. And that's the problem with cystic fibrosis. So I told you now why they have all these problems breathing, shortness of breath, but I didn't tell you why they have salty skin. And here's the interesting thing. These cells are going to start building up with sodium chloride, NaCl, which you guys should know is salt. And this salt is going to build up to a toxic level where the cell is going to have no other way of getting rid of it but then just sweating it out. So this body and the body is going to start sweating out sodium chloride from all parts of the body. These chloride ions are not just in the lungs. These chloride ions are used in all parts of the body. So what you're seeing here may be going on in the rest of the body too. So you're going to have trouble breathing, very, very salty skin, and that's about it. But what's nice about cystic fibrosis is the treatments now are either twofold. We're either treating the symptoms, which are bacterial infections in the lungs, and we're doing that with antibiotics, or the second treatment is treating the actual cause of the problem, and that's the chloride ion receptor. So we're finding ways that we can fix the chloride ion receptor and allow the normal transport of chloride and sodium between the cell. Thank you, and that's cystic fibrosis.